Welcome to Education Talks. I'm David Burke. Audrey Pantelis is the Director of Elevation Coaching and Consulting. Her career in education as teacher, middle leader, senior leader and head of school in both mainstream and special educational needs spans over 30 years. Audrey is an accredited Resilient Leaders Elements leadership coach and See Me colour profiling accreditor. She also works with schools and organisations in developing and implementing positive, systemic changes with regards to racial diversity and inclusive practices.
Well, Audrey, welcome to Education Talks. Thanks so much for joining us. Where are you at the moment?
Right, well, thank you very much, David, and hello. I am in London, well, just outside London, in a place called Watford in Hertfordshire. So I'm about 16 miles away from London. Yeah, that's where I am today.
Oh, that's great. I'm right now in Kota Kinabalu, just getting ready for when this goes to air. It will be a week after the big EACOS conference, and looking forward to that. So thanks very much for being here on Education Talks. It's a real pleasure to have you. Now, Audrey, you worked as a teacher, a middle leader, a senior leader, head of school, and in both mainstream and special education needs.
That's right, yes.
So you made the move from mainstream. When was this, and what inspired the change?
Okay, so we're going back a few years. 2008 is when I made the change. A couple of things probably influenced my change. The first one is, and I have to say this is a bit of a theme in my life / career, is that I tend to jump into the next thing without overly thinking about it, which in one respect sounds really kind of like, yeah, that's really great. And another aspect is, you idiot. So there's a bit of both going on there. So there was an element of that going on, but I think because I know now I'm driven by values, that was probably the biggest thing. And what I was finding in mainstream was that while I loved working with children and loved all the stuff around it with regards to the pastoral needs and stuff, I was struggling with the fact that in secondary education, mainstream education in the UK, everything was driven a lot by standards and exam results and outcomes. And while, of course, we mustn't shy away from that because that's what we all need, want, desire, it was taking up an inordinate amount of my time in just trying to get kids through effectively hoops, trying to get them to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. I felt we were missing a piece. We were missing a piece about the child, about character, about I suppose emotions, about the holistic viewpoint of a person, and that they weren't just all about exam results. And also young people at the time, you know, and I guess it's universal. You've got young people who developmentally at an age where they're trying to discover themselves and they're trying to work out what they're doing, and we're trying to make them fit into this kind of pigeonhole. And I just struggled with all of that. And but I can articulate it beautifully now, but then I couldn't. It was just a gut feeling of, no, this doesn't sit right with me. I'm not too sure why it is. The exam bit I could talk about, definitely, but I didn't know what was actually driving that. And now I recognize that. So that's what made it happen, along with those elements that I said at the very beginning of the conversation, which was a little bit of, get out. And the third part, actually, I think age-wise, I was heading towards my 40th birthday, and you can call it a midlife crisis, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but definitely there was another driver of what else can you do? What else is there for you to do, Audrey? What can you offer the world? So I think all of those things combined kind of led to that particular decision that I made.
Interesting. Now I want to take you right back to the beginning of your career.
Okay.
And ask you a question that I ask some people, and I always think it's quite interesting to go right back to the beginning and ask, why did you decide to become a teacher? What was it that made you want to pursue it?
Yeah, really interesting. I didn't intend to be a teacher at all. It wasn't really on my radar that it was a career choice. And I ended up doing my degree at actually what I didn't realise actually was a main teacher training college. It offered other degrees as as well as the main teacher training stuff. So when I got there and realized that a lot of my friends were training to be primary school teachers, I thought, oh, that's nice. And I was not dismissive, but I in the way I've just said it, that's nice for you, that's good. And it just kind of carried on, no inclination at all. And then interestingly, I suppose when I think about some of the links, I was working in the student union, and I used to help. I remember I set up a play scheme. I set up a play scheme for mature students who had children who, during half term, sometimes it was problematic for them. Now I realise, I look back and think, God, that was a really decent thing to do. But at the time, I was a little bit dismissive and just thought, oh, let me just offer a service. So we ran it, and we ran it for a week. It killed me, but I loved it. And at that point, I still didn't consider that teaching was a thing for me. Still not. And then finished my degree, and then thinking, what am I going to do? Saw a job, and they were looking for an assistant. So I thought an assistant was just an assistant. Someone would hand things out or assist, but didn't really think that assistant meant an assistant teacher or somebody in the classroom. It turned out to be that, and I ended up doing this job. I was an unqualified teacher, and I did it for a year, and I genuinely thought, I'll do it for a year and then I'll go and get myself a proper job, because I didn't consider that it was a career choice at all. And that is how I ended up in teaching. And probably within about 3 or 4 weeks, I thought, I quite like this. I know this is hard work, but I like it and I'm quite comfortable. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I need to start thinking about, if I'm going to do this, I need to get qualified. And my head of department had said to me, you could be a head of department one day. And I thought, oh, okay. So then that's what led to me staying in teaching. But yeah, that was the origins of it. Not my intention at all. Not at all.
It is interesting. I think I was a little bit similar in that there are two types of people. There are people like us who perhaps didn't intend to end up in education, but sort of more or less discover it and are drawn to it. And there are people who are just born teachers who want to be teachers, but the consistency is the shared values, though. We all have those same shared values for students. Very interesting. Now you're now director of Elevation Coaching Consulting.
I am, yes.
Your own company. What was it that then sparked the move to leave schools and set out on your own?
Well, you're going to get the theme, this running theme, this golden thread. So again, a similar thing of had got the school start. It was a brand new free school. So in the UK, I guess the equivalent is like a US charter school, that kind of same vibe. So effectively people get together and put a proposal forward to the government. Yeah, we can set up a school, we can do this, this and this. So once the school had been set up, and I was appointed as the founding head, basically it was literally, just a piece of paper. So we were given that and were told, right, create your school. So I had an integral part in the creation of the school and its ethos and its values, missions, and stuff, and recruited staff. So we went from nothing to an oversubscribed school. Then it went through its first inspection, and that was bumpy. I mean, it was very hard. It wasn't easy at all, and challenged me and what I thought leadership was. But it was the best experience, because in a way I'm kind of feeding off that now as I coach and support others. So when that had happened, basically it got to the point where I thought, well, I've done this now, so I can either now just stay here for the rest of my life, or I can do something else. The doing something else did worry me, so I actually went into stay here for the rest of my life, this will be fine. But again, that whole itchy feeling and hang on a minute, there could be more, and this time now I'm 50. So we've moved on a little bit. 51 actually. So if you're doing your maths correctly. So yeah, I was 51 and I was thinking to myself, okay, so all of those options were kind of starting to make me think, actually, this is my last probably hardcore bit of time to be able to, move around easily, freely, have the opportunities to do different things. And I just thought, well, I've been gifted and with the chance to be able to run a school, and I've done it. So I thought, yeah, time to jump out. So I jumped out. No job.
What's the level of satisfaction around, you know, founding a new school. That must be quite exceptional in
Oh,
itself.
it's 100%, David. I mean, I think the reality of that, and again, in classic Audrey fashion, doing these things and then afterwards going, oh yeah, actually that was quite good, or that was quite innovative. Yeah. How many times do you open a new school? I mean, and it's interesting because actually before I kind of put myself and immerse myself into elevation coaching, I did think to myself, maybe I should have another go at maybe being a head in a school that's already established, because I was mindful of the fact that I'd had such a wonderful and unique setup. So I thought, okay, let's go for, going for another school. So I did actually for a short time, because I did do some leadership interim work before I started my own company, and no, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And my contract was actually, it was an interim piece of work that potentially could have turned permanent. And when I had the opportunity to go permanent, I said, no, I'm okay. And I left. And then that's when I thought, right, do your own thing.
Yes. Yeah. The timing was right.
Yeah.
I guess I wonder, how would you say your experience as a school leader helps you to be more effective in supporting schools today as an external actor in the school?
Yeah, another good question. I think what is interesting and what I have found is, because I suppose I speak head speak. I've sat in their chair, so I know those pressures. And while it's an amazing job, it's equally really hard, and it's equally quite lonely sometimes, because there are decisions that you just have to make and that you will have to shoulder. So while you are always going to have that support network, always, because you have your your executive head or your chair of governors or whoever it is that is kind of line managing you, that they will always be a support. But when I'm going into schools, because I recognize all of that, I will think the way that they are thinking. So I will think in that strategic piece. I will also think about the value for money piece, but I'll also think about what those outcomes need to be for a range of stakeholders. So often, a head will always be thinking about, because that's how we do it. We're always thinking about the different people that need to be served. So I think there's an element of that going on. So yeah, I think that definitely I go in knowing what they need, and I go in thinking, okay, I know how you might be thinking about now. So I know at this time of year in the UK, we're starting to think about September, the new academic year, and you're also thinking about recruitment. You're thinking about, okay, what was my school development plan looking like? Have I achieved those particular things? How can I, manage? Lots of different things. So I know the cycle of a head and what they're thinking about. And I was talking to one yesterday, and we were talking about, in fact, I said, I guess you're thinking about X, Y, and Z. She went, yes, that's right. So it's like I'm psychic, but I'm not really. I've just done their job. That's all.
So it's a very good fit for schools, particularly school leaders looking for that support. Now, the areas that you work in with schools, am I right? DEIJ and leadership in particular. Is that right?
Yes. And it's interesting because they are kind of separate, but they're the same. And actually, I say the same, they're integrated rather than being the same. So effectively, different perspectives of what I think is school improvement, full stop. Because ultimately, if you work with people, then you are always going to be thinking about, obviously, improvement, but you're also going to be thinking about that diversity, the equity, and the inclusion piece. And very much in the UK, we talk about, while J, and as in the justice part of DEI, is very much prevalent, it's now almost become an inherent part of the work that is done in the space, and it's now very much leaning into the sense of belonging. So while inclusion is one part of it, that sense of belonging is really important, because if people do not feel psychologically safe within your organization, they're going to go. You're not going to get that diversity, you're not going to get that equity, because people will always just think, well, actually, I don't quite fit here. There's too much of one thing and not another. And of course, we all have a psychological kind of need to belong, be it tribe, be it family, be it club, whatever it is. We want that sense. Sorry, I thought my dog would be nice and quiet this
Special
morning.
guest on the show.
He should stop in a minute. I apologise. Somebody must be walking past. But fundamentally, yeah, it's just about that. Really, it's more to do with that sense of safety and feeling safe. So that's kind of the driver, I guess, with regards to belonging, and that's now become a really key part of DEI work and developing that belonging.
So, Audrey, what is the difference between a school that really addresses this belonging, a school that does it well, and where can schools get it right? What makes the difference?
Gosh, okay, so I guess this is, to a certain extent, I will say that I haven't necessarily seen a school that has got it completely 100% right. And I wonder if there is such a thing, in that I reckon that there is probably schools that do have elements of it that they're doing amazingly well. So, let me lean into that and maybe think about the ways in which, that there are ways in which we can kind of improve. So the way I'm seeing great practice with the sense of belonging is that genuine appreciation of cultural differences, of ethnicities, of that real diversity of thought. And I think probably the diversity of thought piece is probably the bit where schools I think that's probably one of our weakest areas in schools, because we love consensus, we love compliance. And we often think if there's a good sense of belonging is everybody agrees with everybody, and that there is no conflict, and that the reason why people get jobs in certain schools is because they either they look like, or they act like, or they aspire to be like the majority that are within the school. And so often in recruitment situations, that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for the differences, we're looking for the similarities. So that sense of belonging, where you can be in a space and you can bring your authentic self, and that you are not penalized for that, and that you're also not penalized for being that person that speaks out. And one of the things definitely I know I learned as a head was that recognizing that opposition isn't always kind of a thing to fear. Sometimes it's desirable, because it then means actually you're getting that full breadth and that full perspective. So I think where you see schools doing that really well, where they accept that's great. Schools struggle because they struggle with some of the things I said earlier, because they want the compliance, etc. What they'll tend to do is, it happens. And I think it's again a universal thing. People will get pushed out, or it's made very clear that this isn't necessarily a place for them to be at. So where you see it done well, you don't get that behaviours, and you get that real breadth. And where can we kind of improve on that? I think schools thinking about it from a really a more broader perspective, rather than thinking, okay, we have to have a diverse staff cohort. So not that it's box ticking or quota filling, but the idea that you have a range of ethnicities, a range of cultures, will mean that actually there's a real sense of belonging. No, not necessarily. Sometimes there are people who work within schools, professionals who may have different diversity traits that they don't necessarily want to celebrate. They don't necessarily want to be, the bunting comes out and the trumpets come out every time they do something, because of their protected characteristic or their diversity trait. It might simply just be that your organisation is one where it welcomes that difference, and it's okay just to be different within that space without feeling the need to declare it. Because sometimes that's also a thing as well. Some people feel that they have to do that, or if they don't do it, that it makes them look odd, and it shouldn't be like that. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts on where I'm seeing good practice, and it's an evolving thing. It's not anything that happens straight away. So yeah, once you're aware of it, I think as a leader, then you start to look at the different aspects and the ways in which you can address it. And certain schools would look at different things first. So yeah, it just depends on the context, I guess.
So I guess this then relates to my next question, which is one that I do ask sometimes, which is, what is it that makes a good leader?
I think part of it is a sense of in fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the 4 pillars of the coaching framework that I use as a leadership coach. So I use the framework that's from Resilient Leaders Elements, and it's the idea of using resilience, which of course is a buzzword, and of course we've been using it for, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. We were talking about resilience and digging deep, but it's a bit more than that. And the 4 pillars, which I think make a good leader, and a leader can be anyone, but obviously we're talking about it from schools, is the idea that you have clarity of direction, that you are aware, a good sense of awareness, that you are able to make resilient decisions, so a resilient decision maker, and that you also have leadership presence. And those 4 things, I think, create a magical leader, and of course there'll be certain aspects of those that will be really spot on and will be really ahead in the game on, and there's certain things that the areas of challenge, and I think that's where the resilience piece comes in, because what we're doing is leaning in onto the areas that we are strong in to help us manage the areas that we're not so strong in, and also of course recognizing that when we are in that continuum, and sometimes we have it where we're feeling really good and we're really chipper and everything's good, and then suddenly we can get into chaos and crisis. That happens to us all. It's about the idea about how do we go from one to the other, and that's where the resilience comes in, and how do we get ourselves back, because sometimes we can go from being in a lovely state of equilibrium and then get into crisis and then chaos, and then we can't get back, and then we just stay there, and it might take us a long time, or we might end up medicating ourselves, self-medicating, an extra glass of wine or too many biscuits or whatever it is. So it's about how we manage that, and all of those 4 different elements really help us to kind of number one, help get that balance, as that helps to be a good resilient leader. And then it also helps us to I think then when you're starting to think about all the different aspects around that helps us to recognize that we're not leaders on our own. It's not in isolation. You're a leader as part of a team, and recognizing that your team help you become that leader as well, because sometimes if we're a leader, especially when you first start, you think you've got to do it all yourself, when actually you don't, but you do think that, and so you kind of without meaning to be rude, you can kind of think, right, I'm going to put on my cape of leadership and I'm going to go and boldly step where no one, because I can do it, I've got all the answers, when actually the real strength of a good leader is that you go to the right place to get the answers that you need, if they're not necessarily from you. You are always going to be part of the solution, you hope, but sometimes you're not, and it's okay that you're not. But going somewhere else to get the help, that's the sign of a good leader as well.
And I guess that goes back to support your point about the importance of people being able to express themselves, and that enables people to contribute. But that also enables a leader to be able to identify the strengths and skills within a school for those people that they can turn to.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think maybe that's the hesitancy maybe of the work that I'm doing now, where some heads are, or school leaders will struggle a little bit with it, because there's that admission of, okay, I don't know, and as educators we've got expertise, and we're trained, and and then we've got young people and children and young people that look up to us because we've got the answers, and we get used to that. There's a safety that I think that's why a lot of us work in schools for a long time, because actually there is something nice about knowing that someone's coming to you for an answer. And you carry that expertise, and that expertise grows over time. So after a while, you start to not necessarily believe the press that people, believe what people are writing about you, but you do have a sense of self and a sense of certainty in your own abilities. So when someone then says to you, actually, have a look at your own abilities, please, or have you thought about it from this particular perspective? that's a challenge. Who wants to be challenged? Not everyone. So actually it's easier just to say, no, I'm okay. I don't necessarily need to look at what it is that you're talking about. But if your staff are telling you that, or your stakeholders, your community are kind of saying, actually, we're struggling with this bit of what we have in our school community, then as a leader, you would hope that you would take that on board. So I don't know if I answered your question. I might have gone off a little.
No,
Yeah.
no, I think you made some very good points. On the topic of school leaders, now, when it comes to leadership coaching, of course, well, most of, if not all, school leaders will have been through some sort of leadership coaching training, many ongoing throughout their career. And, talking with people, certainly in my career, people have like their own sort of, I guess, perceptions to coaching. Some people are right on board and other people a bit more, closed to it. Some people have good success and whatnot. So I just wonder, what is the key to a successful coaching program with school leaders? What is the secret to success?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one I can really reflect on now as the provider. But when I was in the game, as it were, I think the biggest thing that you could do to make sure that your course will be successful is to acknowledge that you need it, and to make clear time for it, because it was definitely a challenge for me to even recognize, number one, I needed to do the training, and if I did need to do it, yeah, okay, I'll do it, but I want to get through it as quickly as I can so I can get back to the business of school. And I think, and I mean, that was a few years ago now, so we're talking at least 5-6 years ago, so it may well be now that climate has changed and there's more acknowledgement and a recognition that actually, yeah, this is something that you need to do. So yeah, maybe there's something in that, but yeah, I think that would be the first thing: acknowledgement that you need it, making the time, and making sure that your team or yourself, that you give yourself that time, you give yourself that permission to carve that time out of your day, because you are so driven by other things. And then I guess it's about the incremental piece of work on I think about recognizing how you acknowledge the learning that's taken place, because sometimes it's I think someone's used it, somebody we both know has used this phrase about it's learn and forget type thing. You do it and then you just kind of go, yeah, I've done that. And there's no application. And one of the things as a provider now I always make sure that there is some form of application that you can do, go away and do. And in some of the courses that I'm running with schools, we do all the learning bit, the discussion, the talking, the factual bit. Then it's right, here is your task, and you actually need to go away and do it. And then we give time for people to follow up on that. So that would be something that I would say that probably would be opportunities for them to do on a regular basis. But it all starts with, if you like, the culture and that setting up and that contracting that says, yeah, we are going to commit to this. We are going to give ourselves time to do this, and to do this as well as we can. But if you go through it thinking, oh yeah, I've just got to do it, and I'll get through it, or it's just a nice time for me to stop for a minute, but then I'm just going to get back up, and then there's issues there. So yeah, that would be my thoughts, I think, on that.
Very good. Now, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing schools in these areas where you offer support? What are the biggest issues, biggest hurdles, the biggest things to overcome?
I think probably one of the biggest things at the moment probably is finances and budgets. I think people want to do these things, but in the UK, there's a big cost of living crisis. So, suddenly, energy bills are through the roof, and they genuinely are through the roof now. So people just don't have the money to do what they used to do. So they're trying to find the quickest and most cost-effective way to do things, which is fine. And to a certain extent, providers like me, that's part of our job to find those things. But equally, we've all got to eat as well. So it's about managing that and having that balance. I think that's that and time. So going back to, if you like, my earlier answer about making time, because there never is enough time in education. In schools, it's like time kind of runs out. Time is different. When I work for myself, I notice the difference that a day is really long. And my husband is a teacher, and he says to me, when he works 4 days a week, and so he always says the day feels different. When he's not at work, the day feels really different for him, because he says, oh, the day seems slower and more measured. And yes, sometimes I think my day isn't slower and isn't more measured. So it's really interesting about how the sense of time. But schools, when I'm in a school, I feel it too. Because the bell's going for the next lesson and the next thing and recess and whatever. So it's a constant kind of catch up. But at home, there's no bells, just a barking dog.
Now, Audrey, is there anything that you're currently working on that you're really excited about?
Everything I do, I'm really excited about. Everything I do, I'm excited about. I think I'm excited by I suppose the breadth of work I'm doing. Really, I'm creating because I tend to do when I work with schools, I will always create what they need. So I love that the innovation part of me and the creative part of me that has the opportunity to be able to kind of fulfill that. So one of the things I suppose I'm really loving at the moment is the idea that I'm doing some quite targeted pupil based work, so really getting their voices heard and giving them opportunities to kind of reflect. Some of the schools that I'm working with who really want that work, because when I have a good relationship or I work directly with a school and I'm getting that bespoke piece, I love to create that where I'm seeing actually there's a gap there. I'm also enjoying the work of helping hesitant schools kind of step forward. So I'm giving them some real breaking it down. And I know I'm very much a generalist in this field. I'm not a specialist, and that's fine, because what I can do is, if they want deeper work, I signpost them to other organisations and places to work with, because I work in a range of spaces. So I'm also an associate coach for a couple of other companies, and so that's great. So what I tend to do is, if in my generalist kind of like jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing, if that happens. No, actually, I'm a master of every trade. I shouldn't do myself down, but the reality is, but genuinely, if there's an area where actually you want someone who has a real insight into curriculum, for example, I know where to say, right, you need to talk to this person, and I will just, I will let that person know and put them in that direction. So yeah, it's all great. I think, every people-based work, hesitant schools and thinking about a particular area, and just seeing those breakthroughs. I think, all the work I do, I absolutely love. But I think for me, I really want to break into, I suppose the thing I'm really working on is wanting to break through into the online space and thinking again about that cost thing. And thinking about how I can provide resources that are online that are applicable to all, regardless of where you are based. I think that's probably my big thing at the moment.
I can imagine that being very valuable for a lot of people. Now, how can people get in touch if they want to reach out and get in touch? What's the best way to do that?
Yes, I'm to use the phrase that young people use. I'm all over the socials, but actually there are two main ones that I use. I'm on LinkedIn, so you'll find me under my name, Audrey Pantelis, on LinkedIn, and you will also find me on Twitter. And Twitter, my handle is at Audikins, so you can find me on that. So yeah, I am on Instagram, but I think probably don't. Yeah, find me on the two that I've said. Those two are my clearest ones that you'll see a presence there, and there's backstory, and you'll see some posts, and I've got blogs, and of course I have a website which is www.elevationcc.co.uk.
Fantastic, and all that information is on screen and will be in the description, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube. But look, Audrey, it's been fantastic to connect and have a chat, and I look forward to perhaps catching up at some point in the future. And thanks again for being on Education Talks.
Thank you.
Education Talks is an EdEvents production for the EdEvents community. You can keep up to date with the development of the community by registering on the website at ed.events.